So he can talk a little bit about what he
Actually,
remembers.
I think the historical documents.
Mike,
Okay, we're gonna let Mr. Bailey speak.
there you go. Perfect. Bob. Right, Mr. Keys.
Well, as a kid, I can remember that on our place, we raised quite a few dried peas. And they were dried. You cut them and windrowed them and ran them through the combine or threshing machine. But the pea factory was in Hamilton, and it's now where that Iron Horse workout center is. And the Big Ditch Company bought that building from the pea factory, and then they sold it to the athletic center. But they'd only take them in 100-pound bags. You couldn't deliver them bulk. And I can remember bagging them at home out of the combine into 100-pound bags. And they were kind of a canvas bag. They were real heavy cotton bags. And I can't remember when that went out. That probably went out in later 50s, mid 50s, when they quit that.
Before that, I think.
Was it before that? Can't be too much before that. I'm not that old. And I can remember it too, so it can't
Well,
be, it had to be maybe in that era.
What was going on, we were raising seed peas for the people that raised peas for the cannery. And the dried peas were seed peas.
Okay.
And, yeah, we raised seed peas. And as I remember, the cannery people provided the seed to start.
Yeah.
And it was a dusty, dirty job.
Oh, yeah.
And we ran them through a threshing machine. This was before combines were invented. That's probably the 40s.
Yeah,
Yes.
when it started, yeah.
As far as the cannery goes, I can remember applying for a job I didn't get from Jay Briggs to help stack silage from whatever they used to separate peas for the cannery. It wasn't just a threshing machine, they had a special machine. And so I'm sure you had to wait your turn because it was a special deal.
I just remember that we just took dried peas in a 100-pound bag.
Yeah.
I
And
couldn't
those-
handle a 100-pound bag then.
those were-
That's a pretty heavy bag.
Those were great bags for packing
Yeah.
and to put a elk quarter in or something like that. They were double strength canvas and we used the same thing for alfalfa seed. Those were great bags. Yeah, we did that too. We raised seed peas for the cannery.
Was that cannery there by where Mr. Feet used to be?
Well, it's where that workout center is
There
now.
was Safeways is.
Yeah, well, where that big,
That was a big long L-shaped building.
well,
Safeways.
The irrigation district bought that.
yeah,
Yeah.
And
it wasn't part of Safeway.
No,
That's on the other side of the
Safeway went and built that store there after they
No,
moved that building out.
no,
that's
the
different.
outfit that was the cannery was right where that.
Or where they are now, on the other side of the
The
track.
parking lot, because we had a shop there just to the east of the main building. And,
The feed store was on the west side of the track.
Yeah, right.
Right.
and it's kind of interesting because that originally and obviously had been built by Marcus Daly's interest.
Yeah.
Because the top of it had a amphitheater type thing where you could look out over his old race course. What's the name of the road there? What is it?
Tammany?
No, it's, Tammany Lane is up there,
Daly,
but,
Daly.
just under the hill. That was part of Marcus
Oh, Big
Daly's
Corral.
old race course.
Big crow.
And, anyway, the
That's part of the race.
facilities in the top part of that building were there when we sold it. I don't know, it's probably been moved now. But the irrigation district, the commissioners that bought that facility were looking way ahead because that enabled us to sell that and come up here and buy Oscar Hall's, Roscoe. Was it Roscoe?
Yep.
Hall's place, which makes a beautiful headquarters for the irrigation district now. But it certainly wasn't good. I came so damn near to backing into that telephone pole that sat right where you backed up in front of the office so many times.
You found another one to back.
Yeah, wasn't the only one I backed into. But that, yeah, I had quite a bit of experience with that building. And of course, I was on the irrigation district board for 24 years.
Oh, boy.
And so everything that's bad about it can be attributed to me.
And everything was good.
As well as everything that's good. That's right. That's what Jamie just said. I think there's probably more good than bad since we're able to irrigate and produce crops in the valley,
So
huh?
how long were the beet,
Sugar beets?
yeah, when the beet dumps and,
Well, sugar beets basically left when it wasn't,
72.
the economy of scale got them. You just couldn't raise enough beets in the Bitterroot Valley to keep the facility in Missoula going. And it seems like half of the farmers in the Bitterroot worked down in the sugar beet factory in the fall.
Well, after the factory went out in Missoula, they shipped to Billings, and Bob was part of that.
Yeah, that's, well, see, when you look at the history, the peak of the beets was around 1950, there was 5,000 acres.
Yeah.
And then it started to dwindle after that, and it was mostly attributed probably more to labor than anything else, and not necessarily the cost of raising the crop. It was just,
Well,
because it was very labor
and
intensive.
where did you have to ship them to?
Well, we shipped them to Missoula till '68, and then in '68 they closed American Crystal in Missoula,
Yeah.
and we shipped to
Columbus?
Billings to Western Sugar over there.
Well, if you go by that Billings area during sugar beet season and see the trucks of beets coming out of Wyoming and Montana, you see why the Bitterroot couldn't compete with that.
We were down to what 400 acres in '78 when they finally took their contracts away. There was only basically, well, there were 7 of us that were left, but there was, you know, they had the Tinsman brothers and Ben Nichols and Lee Erickson, my dad Homer, and myself left us.
Seems
At
that
that time, we were down to what 400 acres.
didn't Otto Kloss history, do I remember right that he produced something like 7,000 acres of beets?
No.
How many acres?
No,
did
he only had, he grew the same amount of beets that my family always grew.
The rest of it did?
50 acres a year is what, maybe, if you maybe added the total up through his lifetime.
Yeah, through his lifetime.
Yeah.
No, I think 150 acres was the max that anybody in the valley had at any one time.
And of course, I remember Clarence Golf raised beets. He raised beets with horse equipment. And one year, you got a rain where nobody could get in the fields with tractors. And he went in and was able to harvest his beets with the horse equipment. And then he fed the tops to a sheep. That was the big part of it.
Well, that was the biggest byproduct of sugar beets was the feed that we got off of the tops. 'Cause
Yeah.
We didn't, I know on our place, we didn't feed our cattle with hay until the 1st of January. 'Cause they were on tops all that whole time.
out of the field.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
they
they,
windrow them in the field so that they.
well, and they thought it was, the cows thought it was candy.
Yeah.
I mean, if you know how a pig will go and root, the cows will do the same thing, turn them out in the fields. So, you take the white face and it'll be just covered with dirt, through their ears.
Of course, Clarence ran his sheep on
The first beet factory in Missoula was built in the teens. And I can remember my dad talking about back in the 20s and 30s, they were raising them up in the valley here. But it was mostly manual work. They had diggers that they'd tow behind an old 9N Ford or something, and they'd pull them up, and then they'd hand top them, throw them into a a windrow that was made by an old stone boat, and then they'd fork them into the trucks.
Or even I've got pictures of wagons, horse-drawn wagons where they threw them into. It took, all the boys in school got out of school during harvest to go harvest.
I remember that part of it, yeah. That
When
was
did they build the migrant camps up there?
Okay, the migrant story is probably goes in phases, because we've, the early years I can't really tell you up until about around World War II. I don't know what happened prior to that as far as labor, but during World War II, of course, we had a shortage of men there because everybody went to war. So they built on our place on the corner of East Side Highway and Bailey, they built a tent camp for the German prisoners of war. They brought them in as replacements.
Wow.
And then they were, I don't know how many years they were here, but they had those, there was a camp supposedly down in Stevensville too.
Well,
And then there was one over in Billings, and it was all out of a group that was headquartered out of, I think it was Paul, Idaho, I think the research is found. Around 1945, 46, when they shipped them back to Germany, I'm not sure if that's when the Filipinos came in, and they had real problems with them. They all wanted to become partners in the business and stuff. So that was very short-lived. And then I think we started turning towards the Mexican labor out of Mexico. I remember in the early 50s, we brought up several plane loads of them. And on where I have my sales lot, highway, is where that camp was built. And that was built as a cooperative with all the growers at that point.
yeah, I helped build those buildings. My dad did. I got the pound nails. I was probably 6 or 8 years old.
Yeah.
Because we got the German prisoners to pick apples. And you had to contribute to building the facility to be eligible to get the prisoners. That's what I remember about it. And we had to, we just had a little pickup truck with a stock rack. And so my dad covered that with basically with tar paper, I think, because you had to have a covered vehicle to haul them from the camp up to where they were gonna work. And for you guys, it was right out their back door.
Well, in that camp, I think only got used once or twice.
I just remember that they were there, because I can remember having the prisoners in the orchard.
The Mexicans that came up, a lot of those weren't your typical working class Mexicans. Some of them were pretty highly educated that came up on that first go around.
And you'd time your hay crop, so when they were done thinning beets, you'd get about bales.
They were all good labor, and then in later years, of course, we ended up having to depend on migrant labor out of Texas and Arizona, and now that got, it worked for quite a few years. It was very good, for us. But then that they started finding other jobs that were better paid, of course, and stayed down there. And we had a lot harder time finding people that worked the sugar beets.
Well, I guess none of the Chaffins are here, are they? But Madge Chaffin used to run our sorting apple packing facility when we were picking apples in the orchard. That's Bob's mother, Bob Nicholson's.
No, mother-in-law.
Mother-in-law, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Probably the other biggest asset to the sugar beets was the changing of where the railroad's at.
Yes, yeah.
Because it came down 93, and with the beets mostly on the east side, it was the biggest contributor to getting the railroads shifted to the east side.
And that was in the 40s.
28.
Pardon?
The railroad moved in 28.
Oh my gosh.
That's when our little depot, that's now our museum, was built. Over there at the end of Victor crossing was 1928, so
Sounds,
that's,
that sounds right.
when it moved.
Yeah. Because the first railroad was lumber and the mine, both. And I suppose the mines up south of Dargan contributed, but the Curlew depended on that railroad coming through there, being spur for the load.
But it went clear to Hamilton.
Huh?
It went clear to Hamilton, the railroad then.
Yeah.
When it was built, what, built in the 1880s?
Came to Victor in 87 or 88, I think.
My
1887.
grandmother came out on that railroad.
I remember old Bill Lars Christopherson used to talk about that because they went and railed in a bunch of elk. And then cannon cars got loaded in there in Hamilton where Safeway store is today. Not until then.
They
went up and watched them
they
unload.
introduced elk, right? Because they were originally a plains animal, and
Well, the elk had been hunted out because in the first place the Indians depended on them, and the second place the white settlers that came in found them very convenient to eat too.
okay.
So
So they
my
were here, but they were just hunted out.
Yeah, exactly. And of course then we started getting
They
some
were
game
down here
laws.
from Lewis and Clark.
Yeah, they started starving.
They were plains animals.
Yeah, but they starved to death because the elk had migrated. The elk, according to some of the early accounts, migrated across Reynolds Pass. What's the name of it? Between Lincoln and Great Falls. Rogers Pass. All of the game animals, the elk particularly, migrated out of this valley up onto the grasslands west of Great Falls. And there was a period when Johnny Whetstone told me they were getting 4 feet of snow up in the East Fork, and those animals couldn't winter here.
Is that your ringer?
No, it reminds me of the old high school days.
You was talking about the Chaffins. Carolyn could tell you about the Chaffins.
Well, the Mitchells and Chaffins came to the valley, and their Mitchell Slough is my people did that.
Oh, wow.
When they were having the big controversy whether it was a tributary of the river, I tried contacting someone, and they said, "Do you have documentation?" And I didn't think fast enough. It made me mad.
I have a birth certificate.
But why else does it have the name the Mitchell Slough? So, yeah. So Mitchell's said there was too damn many people here in the valley, and so they moved on to Park City. So, what they think now.
When was that? What years? Do you remember?
I think there's documentation that there was 1864.
So what can you share with us about the building of the Mitchell Slough?
It was a swamped out area, and they, as farmers, was trying to utilize the water. And so they got in there with stone boats and horses and actually made a ditch.
Okay.
And so it was not a tributary, but of course, when they were trying to get the law passed that ownership of all the water, they passed it through without, how can you fight someone like that?
Well, as we look at the history of the valley, our lifeblood is water.
Right.
Absolutely.
You know, and of course, the watershed is the primary source for our water. So we have to, there's been, all the ditches that have been developed for irrigation, mainly for irrigation, for agriculture, not necessarily for fishing. But that seems like that's what it's turned into for the most part. But the Humble Drain's another example of like the Mitchell Slough draining ground that was a little bit on the swampy side. I know across our place we found in the records there was parts of it called the Birch Creek Slough, which is now probably the sod farm. And that was all for draining that water off to make it productive.
And of course, that brings us right back to the watershed,
Right.
which is operated by the Forest Service. And they operate it to maximize the amount of trees on it. And trees use twice as much water as any other plant on it. And so the old water rights that were filed in 1895 or 93 don't produce like they did because the forest takes it now. The forest takes twice as much water as grassland does. And it was historically in grassland with trees on it. That's the point. There's a term for that. It's called savanna. It was grassland with trees.
Okay.
Yeah. And that was maintained by fire. And as my dad said, his granddad told him that they tried to emulate the Indian burning when they, to manage the forest vegetation. And of course, he didn't get here till 1879, but he bought the ranch there at the east, or at the mouth of Sweathouse Creek. And they had all that foothill area that was in yellow pine. And that was the way it was maintained, was by burning it off. And I shudder to think, my dad would go out in the spring up on the east side when we were cleaning the ditch, light his old corncob pipe and just toss the match out. You just about had to follow him around with a bucket of water to put out the fires because he would burn in the spring.
How many acres? So he was attempting to do a controlled burn.
Well, I wouldn't say that he was, no. The ranch up at the mouth of Sweathouse had that foothill area up there that I think Prescott still has that part of it. And it's, I think it's around 700 acres up there yet. Well, it may not be because he sold off the stuff on the north side of the creek. But the important thing was that historically, the Bitterroot Valley was cultivated by Indian burning, and it was grassland. And that produced enough animals for the Indians to live on. But when white people came in, you had this tremendous surge in population, and they didn't have enough animals for everybody. And so they starved the Indians out. The last Indians that left, and I think they left in 1884, 86, 1891. They were a pretty tough outfit because they'd been starving for years. They didn't have anything to eat. They were used to hunting, and all of the game animals had been shot out. No, the family used to spend their time, well, when they thought they were making money on the mine, they spent their time in the mountains and very familiar with the game animals. And one of the places that they would go is up Lost Horse and then circle around through there and come out either Blodgett or Big Creek and spend the last part of the summer up there prospecting, hunting, fishing. We have a picture of grizzly bear hides on top of a tent. And of course, grizzly bears were worth about, what, either $25 or I think $75 a piece for ornamental headpieces for the British Army. That was the market for grizzly bear because that long fur would wave when they move, just like the natives in Africa. If you ever saw that movie, I can't think of the name of it now, but it shows about 1,000 of these tribesmen all with these big porcupine quill headdresses on, all marching towards these British soldiers. And that had to be a pretty chilling thing to see.
Another thing that's pretty big here in the valley was hogs. There's a lot of pigs in the valley. We used to grow,
Pigs were raised
grow a lot
and
of
pork was processed to sell to the mines primarily in Phillipsburg and Granite.
Yeah, in later years, we raised a lot of hogs. We had 45, 50 sows,
Yeah,
and we sold pigs to Davies every week in Missoula.
yeah, we
Did
did
you-
that too.
Did you say 45 or 50 sows? Is that what you said?
Between 45 and 50 sows.
Oh,
Raised
yes.
all 12 pigs a week in Missoula to
Well, he
Davies.
was,
Along with dairy, and we milk 125 cows.
So you everybody's always been entrepreneurs and very diversified to live in the Bitterroot Valley, it sounds like.
Gotta be diversified.
You had to keep from starving to
Yeah,
death.
sounds
There's
like.
pretty good potato industry too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You bet there was.
That kinda pretty well died out. I guess Johnny Higgins was probably the last, and then, or what's the other fellow, 3 Mile?
Oh, Preston.
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 Yeah, and those were about the last ones that really.
Well, Junior's still got a few.
You know, Junior-
For his family.
But, no, we had some on our place. They raised them in the 40s too. 'Cause we
Used to get the tribe to come down and pick the spots.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the kids used to get out of school.
Yeah.
How big was Sternicia's with the potatoes and
They
stuff?
were, they had a fair acreage. I don't know if it was they were over 100 acres.
I think it was around 100.
Did they rotate a lot up there on top of the golf course?
Yeah,
They were down there in Scalpa Hall.
well, they were in Scottsdale, and they grew, I think, a little bit off, I remember, right on the stock farm there, down by the mansion there.
That was Thomas that had him down there in the
Thomas, yeah.
Scalzo.
Yeah.
Well, Higgins, down north of Stevensville,
Yeah.
and Clarence Hagan.
And then, yeah, the Dewart had it down there, and then Johnny, when he took over, he rented part of my place.
Yeah.
Well, my uncle used to grow quite a few, and I remember in high school, I used to go over and help load semis out. It took 400-pound bags to load a semi.
Yeah,
You know
I
exactly.
know, I bucked lots of them.
44,000 pounds.
Yeah. And then later in years, Carolyn and I grew potatoes, and then we bagged and sold to Safeway and Michael's Produce, different places in town, along with milking and raising hogs.
When in later years, after we went through what I call the dirty 80s, or everything got so, interest was so high, we had to kind of cut back quite a bit, and we tried a lot of truck farming, raising sweet corn, raised Kavoka squash for sent to Japan. Those things are feasible, but they're hard work, they're backbreaking, so.
Well, when did interest rates hit 18%?
That was 1980.
Was it 1980?
Because I went through from 78 is when I hit my first disaster. I lost my cows because of brucellosis, and then we sold for $350 and had to buy them back with borrowed money for $500, and I thought and then we saw our debt just triple overnight because of the interest.
That's what I remember. And you were lucky if you could even get it.
PCA went to 22%.
Yeah, that's when that's when
They broke a lot of people.
PCA was probably the one that broke most everybody. They were
Yeah,
the worst. They were
yeah.
the worst offenders as far as overlending.
The B stock.
Yeah.
Yeah, I never got into that. I thought if,
You were lucky.
well, if Farmer State Bank didn't want to loan me money, somebody could have bought it.
And as long as you owed them more money than what you were worth, then you were fine.
Somebody's motto was never get in debt to less than $1 million. If you get in that far, you were safe.
Well, we went out of the dairy business in 1986 in that government buyout, and we was getting more money then than they're getting today.
Oh my gosh.
No, that's a fact. We was
Talk
getting
about that,
15
talk about that, would you please?
We was getting $15.86 for our milk when we went out on that government buyout. What are you getting today?
11 and a half.
Now, something's wrong with this whole picture.
Yeah.
And there used to be a lot of dairies in this valley.
Everybody.
A lot of dairies in this valley. In 1924, the cheese factory in Corvallis, Montana was the largest cheese factory probably in the world, in Corvallis, Montana. And they produced 892,996 pounds a year. The ministers of agriculture in Minnesota and Wisconsin said their largest plants there were about 600,000 pounds a year. So right here in Corvallis, Kurt's building,
Yep.
where he fixes everything right now, was the largest cheese factory probably in the world at that time.
Wow.
And when I was 10 years old, I used to go with my uncle get weight there,
Yeah?
feed dogs.
And byproduct of that was raising hogs.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the early dairy industry was the cash flow for people that lived here on the farms. They could take their cream to town, they'd go to the creamery, they'd test it, they'd pay them cash. They could then go to the grocery store or wherever and they could buy their sugar, and they could buy their pepper, and they could buy the stuff that they couldn't grow here.
Go to Bay's grocery store.
Go to Bay's grocery store, whatever. But that was their subsistence, and that gave them the cash to be able to do that. And so everybody, every little farm had a milking shed, and at that point it was called Grade B dairy. The Grade A system came into the state of Montana in 1950, roughly. That's when our parents moved from Grade B to Grade A in 1950. So we were one of the first, if not the first, Grade A dairy in Ravalli County, 1950.
All the Grade B, most of it back then was all in milk cans.
It was all in milk cans, absolutely. Even the Grade A for a time was. Yeah.
And they hauled back the way and fed the hogs.
You're talking about getting 1586 in the 80s. In 1982, if you had $28,000, you had the same amount of purchasing power in today's money, you'd have about $74,000.
Say that again, Phil, please.
$28,000 in 1982, the purchasing power in today's money would be $74,000.
Oh my gosh.
$74,000 in today's dollars, be able to buy what you bought in 1982 for $28,000. So that $11 and change that Dan's getting
Yeah.
really is
That's-
$11 and change compared to what you were getting.
Yeah, but another, for instance, in 1986, we bought a brand new Ford pickup. They're 76. It took 17 Holstein steers to buy that pickup. In 2006, my son bought a new Ford pickup. Basically the same thing, not a fancy one, the same thing. It took 82 steers to buy that pickup. Now, something's wrong with this whole picture. No, that's a fact.
No, it's
Oh, I love that. I love that analogy.
Yeah.
It's not good, but I like the analogy. We
Pay
pay
their
for our
bills. My
trucks and
grandfather
steers.
used to slate the road from Lolo to Missoula with 6 Clydesdales. And he paid his taxes, that's how he paid his taxes. And he used Clydesdales because they were faster on the road, and he could get there and back in a day.
My father-in-law always said that you could go to Darby with the freight wagon in a day, but it always took 2 days getting home because you were loaded coming back. And it was uphill to get to Sula. So, and when Andy Vogt came to Sula, they said, George told me one time, he said, I said, Granddaddy Vogt, why did you settle in Sula? He said, because that's as far as the road went. He could have bought most of Missoula for 10 cents an acre when he came here in 1886. But it didn't look real productive to him, so he kept going.
Huh. Isn't that something?
Daryl, tell us a little bit about mint. How did mint work?
Oh, yeah. Well, we started growing peppermint when we quit dairying. And there was a lot of peppermint in Washington and Oregon and down in Idaho and quite a bit up in Kalispell, and we thought, good cash crop, we'll get into growing peppermint. So, and it's expensive to grow. You can get 1,000, 1,200 an acre in it. And you get paid by the pound, so we put in a still, and you gotta distill the oil out of it. You swath it like you do hay, alfalfa. You take the conditioner out because there's no oil in the stem. It's all on the back of the leaves, little oil pockets. And then you let it dry, and then you chop it and blow it into these special tubs, and then you steam it. And you steam the oil out, and the oil turns to a vapor, the same as steam. Then it goes through a condenser, and then the oil floats to the top of the water, and then you float the oil off the water, and then put it in 55-gallon barrels. And we was contracted with A.M. Todd Company out of Kalamazoo, Michigan. And we had Wayne Olson growing some, and Shane Morse growing some, and we did pretty well for 2 years until our buyer that was buying for Kalamazoo decided to go to So they started flooding the market, and they deliver their oil to California on the dock for $6 a pound. We're contracted for 15, and 12 is a break even. Well, then it shot our market in the foot.
Sure.
But that oil's so bad because they're putting it in DDT oil barrels, they're putting it in crankcase oil barrels, whatever they can get, and they just grow a little spot in the garden, and then they take it to another Chinaman that does the distilling for them, and they heat their boiler with cow manure or horse manure, whatever they got, no, that's serious, to process it. Well, it broke us. It just broke our market. We couldn't compete, so it all went out. There's a little bit in Kalispell yet today. Tutvet's up there, put in about 40, 50 acres, but they market over the internet and put it in little vials. But it's a lot of work what they do. So,
What kind
peppermint.
of mint was in Corvallis just not that long ago?
That's what he's talking
Yeah,
about.
That's us.
If you want to buy a still, it's all.
No, I still, but not to do mint in.
Oh,
I was gonna say, how much
Maybe another
conversion does it
brewery.
need to make that still work, right?
well, that still won't
All I
work.
know is mint gets away in your garden, you can't get rid of it to save your life.
You know,
Chop
Nate
it out, burn it, whatever, it comes
Yeah.
back.
got Charlie.
Yeah, we bought Charlie's digger
Uh-huh.
from him, yeah.
Yeah, he didn't stay in the business very long either.
It was pretty big for a while, and there was good money in it too when we first started it,
That
only
stuff
2
keeps
years.
coming down my ditch, here he comes. It's already stuff.
Well, the wild stuff's already, but this hybrid stuff ain't.
I still blame it
No,
on
it-
Wayne Olson.
Yeah, just blame it on Wayne. Have a love
Blame it on Wayne.
So that was another one of our ventures.
It gets away, you can't get rid of
I
it.
don't know, it might be superior.
Well, that sounds exactly the way, the history of the sheep industry. As soon as the as soon as the National Wool Act was canceled and the wool was released from those bonded warehouses in Washington and Oregon, the price of wool went from somewhere over $1 down to, I don't know, 2 bits a pound, somewhere in there. It didn't pay for shearing the sheep, I remember that. And
Anything pays for
lambs followed, lambs went the same way.
Not if I have to.
And so that's when I got out of the sheep business.
When Carol and I got married, before we got married, I used to go over to her place and help her dad, and he run 3,200 head of sheep, and I'd help him with them.
They used to
It was
graze
different.
back on the Sapphires, didn't they?
The stock farm raised a lot of sheep. One time.
We had a guy lived on our place,
This is daily.
Okay.
in 8 Mile there. They had 3 bands of sheep, and he took them down to Lowell, across the river, and he'd go up through Rosignol, into Petty Creek, and then he'd go into Idaho, and he'd spend the summer chasing those cottontail sheep up there. Then he'd go to Superior, put the lambs on the train, chase the ewes back. All summer long. A guy named Louis Young.
Oh, Undum?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you remember it?
I just remember the name down there, yeah.
I don't remember him, but that's where our first dog that we had when I was a little kid came from Louis Undum.
Was it Shock Dog?
Jack Undum was his
Shepherd.
adopted son.
Oh, was he?
Yeah.
Who was
Jack.
his, who was?
Jack Undum?
He had a bow shop in Missoula. That's how I got to know him, when I thought I could still pull a 73-pound bull. And
He
finally
used to
discovered.
ride over to, before I was born, but he would ride from Stevensville or wherever he was, over to where my parents lived up in Victor.
Uh-huh.
And he had that dog following him, and, they said something about this good-looking dog, and he said, "You want it?" I guess it had followed him from somewhere.
Let's see.
So Sheppy was my first dog memory.
Well, that was an all summer deal. Months and months.
Well, see, my parents always talked about when they were in the 40s, 30s and 40s, my grandfather had 2 or 3 bands of sheep, and he was in with Otto Quast on it. They owned part of what is now the CV Ranch at Darby. And somewhere Otto made, I've got a movie it's on a VHS, it's been transferred now, but it's, taking a sheep up there and it's rickety 1-ton trucks, they double stack them back and they're trying to push the truck up the hill. But they spend all summer up there on the sheep camp.
And herding them.
When did Undum sell out down there?
My great-grandfather died in 54, and right after that, they left.
Oh, was that right?
Maybe about 3 or 4 years after that.
Is that when, whatchamacallit bought it?
Mikesell?
No, before that.
Did they have, you're talking about the,
No, not Antrim.
Grethers owned Mikesell's place, my
Yeah.
grandmother's sister.
Right.
Yeah. And that's where they were kind of headquartered.
Oh, was it at that place? Oh, okay.
And then they lived over at our place too.
Yeah.
And they ran all that east side to Lolo.
and when Bukers used to live down there, Orville told me that he helped lamb and he was paid in bum lambs.
Uh-huh.
And so he raised bum lambs. That would have been Emery's dad.
Some Salish woman made these for my grandmother. She was this little girl.
Wow.
And what's the story, Kim?
Just some Salish woman made them for my grandmother.
Oh,
But
beautiful.
after your great-grandmother died, the Indians used to come down and just stand in the, ride their horses down, and they came down to the, for a memorial, didn't they?
Mhm.
Because somebody, Nicky Pablo's descendant, or,
Yeah.
family?
My great
Yeah,
grandmother used to
yeah.
buy cattle from Pablo.
Oh,
And there was quite a few Indian cattle raisers.
oh, is that right?
And they liked to trade with him because he'd buy the whole bunch.
Yeah.
And he wouldn't divide them up. He'd just give them one price.
Yeah. Oh,
Not like a cattle trader,
yeah.
you know?
Not like today.
Yeah.
These copies.
Ranching and farming, though, it was
I don't know why.
learning a way to get by. You know, people did what they had to do to get by. And
People look at them there.
John Whetstone used to take butter and eggs over to Gibbonsville from Sewell
That's what they said.
With a what?
with a sled in the
Don't
snow,
Salish.
walking. And he'd walk to Gibbonsville to sell his butter and eggs and then come back, and that's how they had a little bit of money for stuff they
They
could
came
raise.
here.
But you did what you had to do. I mean,
There
I
wasn't
thought
any
anybody was being a hero.
Blackfeet in Missoula, but they came in.
Didn't think what? Anybody was being.
Hero or beat anything unusual. They just did what they had to do to get by and make it work. And, you know, in Sula, a lot of people, you can't live there and not learn about the past, because the past is as real as the present in Sula every day. And that's the part that it amazes me. The stories that I know, they're way before I was born, and it's just from living there. It wasn't from trying to do a thing or interview people or anything else. It was just from living there and listening to Marvin and listening to old Paul and Edgar and Edgar shooting his uncle's hog.
One of the Whitestones used to shoot
20 years with a new rifle. I mean, you know, how, and I thought to myself much later, how do I know that stuff?
Both of them this year.
How do I know that?
Yeah.
It's
Bob Dahl
because
was a
it
little
was
guy.
there
Yeah.
in the
Johnny
present
wasn't
every
big.
day.
He wasn't.
Steve would say
Yeah, both of them sure.
something like,
Yeah,
no, that's
exactly.
about the same place where Edgar
Yeah.
shot Charlie's hog. He shot his hog. I said, why did he do that? Well, he got a new rifle and he saw these coyotes
So
over
when
the
I
top
paid,
of the hill.
I don't remember how
And
much,
this big old
$5
hog rolled down
I
the
had
hill.
to shoot. $5 worth of wool.
Whoops.
I got rid of the sheep that year.
Seriously, and I'm
When they
like,
canceled the,
you're
We
kidding
got-
me.
We got
And it was
foot rot
every day.
in
It
our
was every
sheep.
day. So even though
And we were
I
poor
came
sheep.
along a lot later,
No, we didn't sell
you
that
know,
sheep
I
for 2
still
years.
knew that history.
Every week
because
we ran them through this
it was just like it
formaldehyde
happened to
bath.
them.
and I bought sheep.
Story, but
Did you? You got it too. huh?
So I know about it. Yes, I know about it.
Jeez.
But
Trimmed them with
You
corn,
had, yeah,
old
trim them right down to the blood.
right down to the blood.
Yeah, and then dip them.
Dip 'em. Have a broom handle, make sure they put their feet in because they try to hold them up.
Mr. Swanson, you've been awful quiet down there. Oh, were you gonna say
I was
something?
gonna just open that with, one of the things that was important in the early days was also fruit. My parents bought an 80-acre piece from Thatcher, and Thatcher had 1,000-acre orchards. And it was in cherries, the 80-acre piece that they bought was in cherries. And I think my dad took the cherries out in about 1955, 6, somewhere in that neighborhood. I can remember him hiring my cousin to keep the starlings and blackbirds off the cherry trees, and he gave him a 12-gauge shotgun. He was just a little older than me, he was probably 13, and his shoulder was black and blue after a few days of herding blackbirds and starlings around out there. And the cannery's still going. I see they've got an advertisement for work at in the
Starting
evenings.
tomorrow, so that's why the Parkers couldn't come today,
Ah, okay.
Tom and Dorothy.
So that's an industry that was important and still is. And Charlie Swanson's here, and I'd like him to talk about some apples.
Well, our story started in 1907 when my grandfather and his other brothers came into the Bitterroot and decided that they needed to buy some land and get in on the apple boom because that was the big deal. So they put in their first orchard and had their first crop in 1910. And in between times, I guess, you know, we've all heard all that had to be done to keep going. My grandfather was a pretty good woodworker, so he got hired on by Brid to build flumes and other wooden structures. And he'd go to work for Brid for $2 a day and hire a man for $1 a day to get ahead on the farm. And so I don't know how long that went on, but they had a little everything, you know. They had the dairy cows, and they had the hogs, and they had the beef cattle. My father, after he went to World War II, came back and got into the beef business pretty strong. And during this period of time, we still had this one block of 10-acre apples that we gleaned some money off the cash into things that we could keep living on. And then I started in the orchard business in about 1974, and today still have the orchards going. We don't, it's kind of a joke. I mean, we have 30 acres or had 30 acres of trees, and we're the largest grower of apples in the state of Montana, which just in Washington you don't even count unless you got 100 acres, you know, so it's all relative, I guess. But the fruit business has been good to us, I guess, you know, and it's like a lot of these other businesses. It takes some getting used to, because not every time that you got a crop is a profitable crop. You know, you might have something that gets you by, but you're going to have issues somewhere or another. So, but there was quite an industry at the time my grandfather came in here of orcharding. In fact, they have records at the museum. I don't know how many, to go to Apple Days and stuff and look at some of that old stuff, but they had 70, 80 train car loads of apples go out of the valley in the fall. And those cars had, I believe it was 300 cases or 300 bushels of wooden boxes, and then they'd send them back to New York and to parts on the East Coast. And that was going on pretty good for a while, and then the unfortunate thing about this valley is that everybody had to be their own little marketer, and nobody would go and join a co-op. And so consequently, if they had kind of a rough year, they'd they'd stovepipe these boxes, which means that they'd put their very best apples on top and the inferior ones underneath. And didn't take very long for that to go bad, and so they ended up losing their markets on the East Coast. And then where do you go, because you got no population out here, and so the apple boom went bust, you know, in the 20s and 30s, and a few people, you know, tried to keep going on with them. But I remember as a youngster going, getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning, having a truck, a 1948 Ford, which I have. It's not the same one-ton truck with 90 boxes of apples, and driving all day to Butte, and then going house to house, knocking on doors, trying to sell apples. That's a tough road to hoe, I'll tell you. And if you were lucky, you might be able to sell them in a day. If not, then you had to stay overnight, you know, try it,
Slept in the
try
truck.
again the next day. So.
My wife Joni's father had 30 acres of apples right at the top of the road here at the end of Quas Lane. And he had a truck, and that was his deal. He would load that truck up and he'd go on the road. And when he wasn't doing that, marketing his apples, he worked at the sugar beet factory in Missoula. Was his main source of employment in those early days. So.
My grandfather always said that the Saturday Evening Post killed the apple boom with their little, if you move to the Bitterroot, you're gonna die of tick fever.
Really?
They did a,
Seriously?
they did a story on
Story
it.
on it,
Yeah, expose
yeah.
And they blamed it on the apple orchards?
No, it just kinda killed the development of it.
Oh,
You know, it
okay.
was mostly a real estate scam at that
Yeah.
time anyway,
Yeah.
you know?
It was.
Yeah.
So the media was not our friend even back then?
But there was a guy on Snake Schrakengus place who ordered his orchard stock, and he got tick fever, and so he plowed it in a line. He just plowed it and layered it in, and there's still a wall of trees because he died.
Really?
Yeah.
He died of tick fever.
Mm-hmm. And the trees are still up there. They're
Just
all
laid in, they're not.
all laid in, and they're all pretty wild now.
Yeah.
You know, but from the rootstock, you know. But
Huh.
no, this is Clyde Schrakengus' place there in Florence.
Yeah,
Up
west of
One
Florence.
Horse.
Yeah,
Okay.
up by One Horse.
Yeah, my one horse.
And that, the tick business was one of the problems that Bitterroot had.
Yeah.
It was, we all lived through that. And I got tick shots from the time I was, well, I suppose I was a year old.
Ever since I can remember.
And then I came home from the service, 1960, and I went in to get my tick shot, and they said, well, we don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
I was amazed. Well, the family was all involved one way or another with the research on ticks, going out and pulling a white sheep behind a saddle horse and picking the ticks off.
And that's how Reedy Lab ended up here.
Yeah.
Was over
Not
the tick.
Reedy.
Well,
over
and
the
then
tick
it started in
Rocky
Florence.
Mountains.
Rocky Mountain.
Yeah, started in Florence, went to Victor. It was in Victor for a while, and then to Hamilton.
Another thing in the early days was the dryland wheat. And the Peterson family up here, Emil Peterson, they sent their wheat to Chicago to the National Wheat Show, and they won. They were grand champions of the world.
Yeah.
World Championship wheat right here in Montana. He was on the cover of the Wheaties box.
Wow,
That's
that's cool.
Where you now see all the sports athletes, but he was he has a cover that Wheaties. There he is, right there.
Oh my gosh.
Really cool, right here in Corvallis, Montana.
He kept immaculate records, and over the years, he would show that he would get half again much more rain up there than what the valley would get down here.
Really?
And
And
those
the interesting
little
fact
five-
about that is that when the pioneers first came to the Bitterroot, very few people were on the benches. They were
Right.
on the bottoms and they were up in the hills.
Yeah.
Because the hills didn't have all this rocky
Yeah.
interplane that we do on the benches, you know, so they avoided that.
When my granddad built the ranch that I'm on now, why, he dug his own well there and he only had to go like 25 feet. But any of the people that were on the bench, they would stop on their way home from town and fill up their containers of water, because it was so much drier up there. in those places.
Yeah, our farm has or had 3 hand dug wells, and they were all 80 to 90 feet deep, and they were yielding about a gallon a minute.
Yeah.
Oh my
And were they all
gosh.
rock lined and everything?
No, they were just hard, compacted clay.
Uh-huh.
They'd take masonite or, mud and go down part way and kind of stucco it on there.
How'd you like to get down in that hole?
And they weren't very big holes either.
Yeah,
We,
spill it
on
on you.
our bottom place, we have a hand dug well that's lined in stone and whatnot. And it produced well over 300 gallons a minute. And it was like 12 feet deep.
We got one that's about 10 feet deep, and it's the same way.
Same way.
Yeah.
The well,
Still pump out of it.
Still pump out.
the well for my house was the original hand dug well, and that's the well I'm still using. And it's lined with rock. We put a casing down it now, just
Be cleaner.
sanitary. Yeah,
Take the mice from falling.
yeah, that's right.
Well, I dug one of those wells. My dad finished it with rocks and concrete, but I dug down to, it's called tuff, volcanic tuff. And it's just soft rock that doesn't have any grain structure. And from there on, he blasted, because he had worked in the mines. And he blasted down through that, and of course it was witched, and found a stream of water running through that. You know where the old log house is down
Yeah.
there. And I asked a geologist, Bill Groff's cousin, how that occurred. And he said, because that stream was formed before that last layer of volcanic ash came through, and the water kept running through there. And so it maintained that stream. And it was beautiful water,
Yeah.
still is.
How far down?
Oh, what was that? Can't even remember now. It wasn't that deep, but it was under 12 or 15 or 18 feet, something like that. But it was under that 5-foot layer of volcanic tuff, which is, if you've ever hit it with a plow, you don't plow it.
Cement.
It's solid. It doesn't, the only way it'll disintegrate is you let it air dry. If you put a chunk out in the air, then it will decompose to clay, and that's what these clay hills are. It's the same stuff. It's all volcanic ash.
This valley was all different
Hard
at
panning
one
up at your
time.
place is that stuff.
We was in the construction business, and we had our own
calcium
crusher, and we
carbonate,
crushed a lot
isn't
of
it?
gravel there in the bottom, and them ponds
Yep.
that we're digging in. And some of them ponds were down about 20 feet, and we took cypress and juniper out of the bottom of them ponds.
Yeah.
We've still, we got some there in the shop that big around, cypress.
Totally
We
different
know that's what
climate.
it is, cause Schellinger, when they was in here doing the road job on the East Side Highway, they took the University of Missoula and had it tested.
Cypress,
Huh?
Cypress?
Yeah.
Cypress Street.
Yep.
Totally
That's
different
after the lake-
climate.
When the lake went out, why then it just covered everything up
Yeah.
from.
Yeah.
Well, isn't one of these ditches right here where the site is of the new dinosaur find?
Well, that's up by Darby, it's on the big ditch, isn't it?
Oh, there's one right here.
No, it's right up here.
It's on the big ditch.
It's on the big ditch.
Oh, is it up here on the big ditch? Oh. Yeah,
And,
It's a
they're
ti-
keeping
or
it quiet though.
yeah, for obvious reasons.
See, that's why I was telling him Darby, I was trying to get him to go somewhere else.
I thought that, maybe that's the one they blew up on that show Yellowstone the other day.
We don't need people digging around in the, where that is. Well, it's up here on that cut bank. What's his name?
You're not supposed to tell him.
Yeah.
Darby.
But it's an interesting place because you have a cut that's, I don't know, 50 feet deep on that side hill. And you can see different volcanic eras, different time spans, because there'll be pure volcanic ash, then there'll be a spot of 10 feet, and there'll be a layer of soil and roots, and then the same thing on down. And that gives you the geological history of the valley right there.
There's some pretty good petrified wood there east of Florence too.
Yeah.
And
We've
petrified,
got it.
Big chunks of
Is there?
We've got pieces, in fact, we got some there at home, they're about a power pole, it's that big around, that we've got out of the river bottom, when we was digging there, or ponds, petrified wood.
yeah.
Petrified, look like cottonwood, it's petrified. It's real white.
So I've got a question. Daryl shared a story about foreign imports ruining his mint business. Does anybody have a story about your exports being very successful, exporting to foreign countries?
I'll just go back to, I mentioned earlier, they grew Kaboka squash to grow, send to Japan.
Oh, you did, yeah, yeah.
And we grew a very, it was only 4 acres I think we had, but it was a hand harvested, very clean, but everything's got to look like peas in a pod when you send anything to Japan. Everything's got to be uniform. We had a lot of culls. I mean, we had at least probably a truckload of culls. We couldn't sell the culls to the stores, but it's probably one of the best types of squash that you could ever eat. And there's nothing wrong with it, but we ended up throwing it into a pile and had turned some hogs loose in it. The squash that we sent was contracted out of some outfit out of Arkansas, and there was a number of growers throughout Montana that grew it. Well, a lot of them didn't get their crop in real clean condition, a lot of mud on it. And they sent it to, we sent it to Japan. Well, by the time about halfway across the ocean, it started to rot on them. And they brought the their Japanese hazmat teams in and put all this stuff into 55-gallon barrels or in white suits. And then that was, they treated it just like it was really toxic. Well, to be honest, that you could have taken that same stuff and just, fed animals with it, or hogs. There wouldn't have been anything wrong with it.
So as a result, that they probably didn't get paid.
Right. Well,
It never made it to market.
no, and that was just a 1-year shot we had, and it was a very, it was a profitable venture for us, but it was not, but not for the contracting companies.
They're real tough to deal with.
Oh, they are.
Asians.
Well, it's like Neville's with their log homes. They went over with a model home and got a contract for, I think it was 100 homes, if I remember right. And they started shipping them over. They were 30 square feet over their specs, and they just about broke them.
Yeah, and a paper company down there, they send all that liner board over there, and they defect about a quarter of it. And it just cuts the price by 25% after it's there. What are you gonna do? Send the boat back?
Yeah.
I mean,
Take a cruise.
you just gotta take it, Take what you get, but you don't do business with them anymore.
That's right.
Maybe.
Yeah, you learn.
You learn.
Didn't you have your cows at the market the day the government announced the dairy buyout and?
My steers were in Nebraska at the sale, and they stopped the sale.
Oh,
Yeah,
really?
they stopped the sale, so I'm back to, we were feeding them at Pier, so they just sent it out to there. I think they're selling in Sturgis. The price went down like 25 cents.
25 cents on our Holsteins when we had them. We had to brand them with an X, and the price went from 60 cents to 6 cents.
Yeah. Well, I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, they stopped the sale and we sold them the
They
next
killed the whole
week or
market.
2 weeks later for like 15 cents a pound less
It was
than
a joke.
what we were gonna get. Yeah.
The whole thing was a government joke.
Kind of government interference.
So you guys have been dealing with man-made, manipulated markets for
Yeah.
ever.
Forever and ever.
Well, you remember when people used to try to take steer calves or bull calves, dairy calves to the sale, and they couldn't find it. The old joke, they couldn't find a sale for them. The guy stopped to have a beer, and when he came out, somebody else had thrown a bunch more calves in his pickup.
What was that? Somebody else what? Put a bunch
Well,
of
you
more in
couldn't
the
get
pickup?
rid of them.
Oh.
Yeah, I
You could
think-
knock them in the head, but he was trying to sell them.
Well, the same thing with the hogs, they went last year a number of years ago. And you
Yeah.
didn't, you didn't wanna leave your trailer unlocked.
Yeah. Yeah, kinda like horses now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll pay you $30 and take care of my horse for a month, but I'm never coming back.
Yeah.
It's really bad for you to say around Teresa.
No, I get
Bought
it.
2 horses from her.
We, that, on Rosignol's old place there, before you hit the grade going up to the hill, there was like 8 horses out there. And then all of a sudden there was 12. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a period there where they were multiplying pretty quick. 2008.
Well, anyway, some of us today are still trying to survive in agriculture.
It's tough.
Thank God for inflation.
Dan Halls is sitting there thinking, where's my inflation? Where's my cost of living increase?
Well, how many of us here actually are still making a living out of agriculture?
Not us.
Brian?
About 4 or 5 of us.
Well, it's been an old joke, but it's true nationally. You farm as a avocation, and your wife works in town and brings home the living. And that's certainly true with mine. She's worked as a nurse for 50 years since we were married, and just about everybody else I know, their wife has always worked someplace. And what I read in the Farm Journal is universal. That's the story. Everybody's wife works in town and adds to the farm income.
To support the others have it.
Well, you know, you take a look at agriculture as a whole, if you look at the Midwest, there's so much different demographics than we are, because they have large manufacturing plants all through the Midwest, and very little, not irrigation, but the way you farm is so much simpler. And most of those guys, you know, they'll take a couple weeks off in the spring, plant their crops, maybe take care of them on the weekends, take a couple, then in the fall, late summer, they'll take another couple weeks off to harvest, but they'll have a good job at one of these manufacturing plants.
Him and her both.
35, 40 inches of rain.
But some of them go to Brazil and turn right around and raise several hundred acres or 1,000 acres worth of the same crops down there with the same expertise. And so you hear about Brazil competing with the United States. Nationally, maybe we are, but it's the same guy. Same guy that's in Illinois raising 5,000 acres of corn and soybeans. He's doing the same thing in Brazil.
But on our farm, one of us didn't work in town. We both worked on the farm.
Yeah.
Still do.
Yeah, that's what I was did both.
Well, I want to thank you guys all for coming and for your participation, and I think this is a good start.
Yeah. We got over an hour and 10 minutes worth of good stuff, so thank you so much for sharing your memories and your history.
When will your lawyer contact us?
When you're agent.